Well, it sounds like we've got a tough act to follow after that one, but we'll do our best. I think cricket's always a popular subject, right? So yeah, hopefully we can do that proud in this next section on actuarial judgment. So as I said, my name is Scott Holmes. I'll chair this session. I'm with Quantee. Quantee is a general insurance pricing software. And I'm here with Frank and with Brian today. So Frank is joining us from Uber, where you're the VP for Applied Sciences, also the chairperson, board of directors at Casualty Actuarial Society. So a big double role there, I suppose, and yeah, previously of Google, and I think a few different insurance companies, Allianz, etc. And we have Brian with us as well, who's leading the India Actuarial Consultancy with Lewis and Ellis, which you launched in 2023, as I understand it. Held a few different roles at different actuarial societies and consultancies like EY and Travelers and different insurance companies in the past, yeah? So thanks everybody for coming to the session. Thanks for the guys for coming on and talking through this subject today. I think we've got a pretty packed agenda. I don't know if you've got a clicker or something. Is there a, yeah. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, pretty packed agenda. Thank you, Frank. On this subject in the time that we've got today, so I think it's quite a big subject to get through. We're going to start going through a bit of an introduction to the subject around what actuarial judgment is. Look at the different sort of comparisons, you know, when do you use it, the different sort of practical experience of this. So we're really keen to get people's input in this as well and understand your own experience here and understand your own interaction when it comes to this type of judgment. So I'm going to ask Brian in a moment to give us this introduction to what actuarial judgment is, but maybe if we just start, it'd be good, I don't know if anybody's got any sort of initial opinion on what this really means, you know, if there's anything that jumps to your mind when you think about what actuarial judgment is, if there's something that maybe you're, I don't know, a bit nervous around, or if you're a bit afraid of when somebody says, what is your actuarial judgment, or is it something that you thrive on? What sort of comes to mind? I don't know if anybody's got any sort of initial opinions on this. Would it be this button? But yeah, I'm interested to get some views, maybe from the audience as well, but otherwise I'll let Brian start with an introduction about what the subject is as well, yeah?
Great, thanks, Scott. Can everyone hear me from this? Great, thank you. So the topic, as Scott said, is actuarial judgment. So we're going to start very simply. There's two words in the topic, actuarial and judgment, like we put on the slide at the Global Conference of Actuaries. We should generally know what the first word means. And we encourage audience participation. So we really want to dive into this second word, judgment. So can anyone shout out? Will anyone be willing to shout out? What does judgment mean to you? Anything you think of? What comes to mind when you think of the word judgment? Subjectivity?
Subjectivity, yeah.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, well, I'll add a few.
Opinion, yeah. Heard opinion over here.
Opinion, thank you. Insight. Wisdom, discernment, right? No right or wrong answers. Appreciate the words that have been volunteered, but it's essentially, I like the word opinion. We're going to express an opinion on the actuarial topics that we're studying. And that session before us was really great, and you know, there's going to be some tie-ins to cricket in this presentation, having seen that before this session. So if we can go to the next slide. So here we're going to draw the distinction between expert judgment and professional judgment. Expert judgment is based on training, knowledge, experience, and expertise in a subject, right? So if you have these things, you may be considered an expert in your field. What additionally comes into play with professional judgment are professional standards and codes of conduct. So this is a framework we like to use to show the difference between expert judgment and the additional things that we consider, these codes of conduct, when we're formulating professional judgment. And we note that actuarial judgment is professional judgment for actuaries. So that's hopefully helpful to set the stage as we go into the next slides. And as we go into some of the details and talk about some real-world examples, encourage your questions, your interruptions, and of course, Frank, feel free to interrupt me whenever you see fit. So there are common duties of an actuary that are found in codes of conduct. And do you mind going to the, just to the prior slide?
You guys keep going, I got it.
Okay. Okay, that's okay. So there are a number of codes of conduct. Our actuarial organizations have codes of conduct. The IAI does, the IFOA does. For me, the CAS. For others, the SOA. Other bodies, other professional organizations, the Actuarial Standards Board, affiliated with the American Academy of Actuaries. They have actuarial standards of practice. And there's a draft now from the International Actuarial Association, which is a note on professional judgment. So in our work and in our lives as actuaries, we don't have to look far for these codes of conduct and professional standards. Okay, perfect. Oh. So there are certain things that these codes of conduct are going to represent in them, and we call those the common duties of an actuary. The different actuarial organizations, the different professional bodies may call these slightly different things. They may describe them slightly differently, but here are 5 of the key common duties that we see in these standards. The first is integrity. Integrity is about acting honestly, and it's really particularly about acting honestly at all times and when nobody's looking. When we're, whether we're working alone or in teams, we can act with integrity. There's also a common duty to speak up when we see something. If we need to challenge something, if we have a professional opinion to express, I really like that our codes of conduct encourage communication and speaking up when we see something requiring that. Competence and care, these are fairly straightforward, but as professionals, we can be relied on to attain and maintain our capabilities to carry out our work appropriately. In part, we do that by continuing our education and coming to actuarial conferences to broaden our learning about the field we're working in. Complying with legal, regulatory, and professional requirements is a duty of care for actuaries. Avoiding bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence. At the later part of the presentation, we'll talk about maintaining good actuarial judgment under pressure. So this duty of care is to avoid undue influence or pressure in our professional work. And again, communication, which ties to voicing opinions in the integrity section, right? We should communicate clearly to explain our concepts to both technical and non-technical audiences. I'll just ask Frank, anything you want to add before we go forward?
No, I like all these things. I think the key to actuarial judgment is that you have to keep all of these things in mind on top of all the quantitative and technical skills that you bring to the job. This makes our profession different than almost all the other professions out there. There are some other professions with codes of conduct, but for the actuarial one, we take it pretty seriously because a lot of what we do, face it, it's guessing, right? We're making an opinion on something and it's a guess. And if you're making an educated guess, you have to have something that looks like judgment around that. I'll go into some examples later when we talk about models and data scientists. I manage 35 actuaries, but 230 data scientists, so I can really tell you the difference between the approaches to problems across those teams. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Frank. When do we use actuarial judgments? These are just a sample. Some of these may have a P&C flavor because I'm a P&C actuary. When we're choosing data, when we have scarce data, we may have inappropriate data for an assignment, right? A client may say, here, use this data to do the project, and it's up to us to make a good judgment about the suitability of the data. Selecting models, selecting methods. We heard in the last presentation on cricket about choosing, to combine certain batting and bowling metrics, right, to have a highly tuned model for the cricket analytics, right? So when we're interpreting outcomes, when we're testing the reasonability of outcomes, these are also areas where we are going to use and deploy actuarial judgment. There's a number of things on the screen, but others may have examples, and feel free to chime in if anyone in the audience has examples too.
So maybe I'll start with a thought starter. So I may have given this example before, so apologize. But one of the data scientists in safety was studying the amount of hours that an Uber driver would drive and the impact on the number of hours driven continuously against their dangerous driving or crashes, right? And we all not normally think that if you're on the road for a long time, you're going to get tired, and you're probably going to get into a crash. So this data scientist took a GLM with mixed effects and produced a graph that looks like this. So in other words, in the first hour, the driver has a very high chance of getting in a crash. In the second hour, it goes down, and it goes down, and it keeps going down over time. So I don't know, like all of us are saying, huh? So what do you think could be happening? So I asked that question to the data scientists. You all can formulate in your head what's happening. Maybe you'll get the right answer, so think about this. So I went to the data scientist, I said, do you expect this graph? It's like, not really, but it's based on the data. I said, okay. So what do you think the graph is telling us? Should we tell drivers to drive a lot longer because they get safer over time? He said, no. You know what's happening? I said, okay, tell me what's happening. He said, it's survival bias, right? A driver who doesn't get in a crash continues to drive, and therefore they look safer. And I thought, well, if drivers are dropping like flies and dying all the time, maybe that's possible. Like if you had something that was just killing drivers off, yes, of course, there's like a survival bias possibility here, but how could it be so high? You'd have to have everyone getting into an accident and then a small amount surviving. We weren't seeing that in the data. You want to know the answer? Okay, it's very easy. You actually have two different types of drivers. You have those that drive kind of part-time. So they go on, they drive 5 hours, 10 hours. They're not professional, which means they get in more crashes. And then you have a bunch of drivers that drive a lot, and that's their profession. And they're very, very good at it. They know when they're going to get tired. They know when they need to pop a Red Bull, and they know when they need to log off because they're too tired. And so what you're having is a mix effect. So in the beginning, the first few hours, you're seeing all the part-timers, which has a higher accident rate. And off in the tail, 10 hours into the shift, you're seeing the people who are very experienced and therefore have a lower accident rate. And so it's just a simple mix shift. And it took an actuary to pull the data to say, this is what we're actually seeing, because I couldn't find a good explanation. That, I think, is actuarial judgment. So I thought I would just leave that example.
Thank you. Great example. Great example. Appreciate that. So we can move forward from here then. Okay, now we're going to talk about, what we have talked about, right, is what is actuarial judgment and what are our resources for understanding what actuarial judgment is and when we might use it. And now the question follows is, well, how do we get this actuarial judgment? And I like this slide particularly after the cricket analytics presentation because there are four main categories of activity where we obtain and develop actuarial judgment: education and qualification, and also practical experience and understanding. Here we have it written as understanding of the business, but think about it as understanding of the field, the topic, or the sport. And after this slide, in a moment, we're going to take a slightly deeper dive on practical experience and understanding, but I can think of this slide in this way, right? If I read a book about cricket, so I've educated myself, and I take a test about the contents of the book, and maybe I get a certificate, so I've qualified as an exam passer of the cricket test, right? Does that make me qualified to judge a game of cricket? Does that make me qualified to be the commentator, as we heard about in the last presentation? No, it doesn't, for two important reasons. I don't have practical experience playing cricket, and I don't understand the game, sadly. So that's why we need practical experience and understanding in addition to our education and qualification to develop actuarial judgment. And we're all familiar with education and qualification, and that's why we're going to go right into practical experience. These 5 pillars on the screen, there could be others. These are representative, right? This isn't an enshrined framework, but these are just an example of some of the ways that we get practical experience. But broadly speaking, experience is working in the field, playing the sport, studying a subject matter. As actuaries, our practical experience may include knowing data, reviewing diagnostics, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of various methods, performing sensitivity tests, and checking our own work, having others technically review our work. These are just some of the ways that we gather practical experience. It's only by doing and by experiencing that we're going to learn some things that we're just not going to have an intuitive feel for from reading the book or taking the exam. And that's why practical experience is really important for actuaries. For me personally, doing some things incorrect early in my career and being corrected helped me to develop as an actuary. Having seniors review my work and show me a better way, that helped me to develop through my practical experience.
I'll just add to that. I mean, there are certain things that you just learn on the job. I remember modeling loss curves for excess coverage, so the things that cost like $10 million, $100 million. The people who were seasoned in the field could tell you exactly what the 5 million above 5 million should cost relative to 5. They had these rules of thumb, right? And they would also tell me about my curves. I'd be like, okay, well, I've got a log normal here. And then someone else uses a Pareto, and they said, oh, Pareto, they must really want to punish them, because Paretos have fatter tails than log normals. So these things that you just kind of pick up, things where people give me data and they go, yeah, I'm looking at this and there's roughly 1 accident every 5 car years. I'm like, okay, well, that seems all right. Oh, there's a 1 accident every car year. I'm like, that seems pretty high, right? Everyone who drives a car gets an accident every year. That seems kind of high. I mean, it seems kind of high common sense-wise, but also if you're in the auto or the general insurance industry, you get an idea for what looks like regular data and what looks really exceptional. And that's what sets off that actuarial judgment to say, I better double click.
Great, thanks again, Frank. We talked about practical experience. Now we talk about understanding the business. In my experience, right, you can go fairly far as an actuary without deeply understanding insurance. I think that's unfortunately true. So I encourage, if you're working in insurance, as an example, to have a deep understanding of insurance. So to understand the business that you're working on, you could have a triangle of losses in P&C work, and you could take a 5-year average, but to know if the answer is reasonable and appropriate, to be able to judge that answer, I would want to know some things. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but what line of business am I working on? How is the coverage offered? What are the limits of coverage? Are there reinsurance available on the coverage? Has the company's claims handling process changed? What is their claims handling process? Do they use inside or outside attorneys? Where does the claims adjudication expense get assigned, and so forth and so forth. So these are just a sample of things I may want to ask myself to know to know the business better, to understand the business, so that when I'm doing my actuarial work, I can have a better sense for the results that I'm getting. Are they reasonable? To know if the results are reasonable, I need to understand the business that I'm judging. I think, Frank, you might have had an example for this one. If you don't, that's okay.
That's all right. Let's keep moving.
Okay, we'll keep moving. We're going on time. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay. So now we talked about when we use actuarial judgment and how we develop it through education, qualification, practical experience, and understanding. And now we're going to talk about briefly indicators of good actuarial judgment. If you're looking at your own professional work, if you're observing someone else, these are some common signs that you or this other person may be exhibiting good actuarial judgment. And those are your ability to anticipate outcomes, critical thinking skills. Critical thinking through all of the slides here is an important skill. Flexibility, right? There are many degrees of freedom to actuarial analysis, and we need to exercise our judgment prudently to know where in these degrees of freedom a reasonable answer may fall, but we can also demonstrate flexibility in assessing what the appropriate answer is. Ability to learn from mistakes. A peer review, right? Asking someone to technically review your work, asking someone to peer review the reasonability of your work is typically a sign of good actuarial judgment. Consistency in decision making. For me, consistency doesn't mean I've made the same decision every time, but maybe that I have a framework for making a decision. Confidence from others, that can be another contributor too. I like to think of all of these things, and we talked about duties of care. We can also talk about materiality, right? Impact, right? When we're making a decision, we certainly want to be informed by the potential impact of someone relying on our results.
Maybe just quickly, Brian, I'm interested, based on your experience, whether there's one here which you think is maybe typically more of a challenge perhaps, or where you see sometimes it can be harder for people to understand, you know, to be able to identify it. Do people typically struggle to learn from their mistakes, for example, or be able to get confidence from others? You know, do you find that there's one here which is sticks out for you more than the other?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. The one that I'll highlight, and Frank may have another answer too, but the one I would highlight is flexibility. Flexibility and creativity in actuarial analysis is really important. We don't always have complete data. Sometimes we have little or no data. We may have prescribed methods, but we may often need to modify our methods when we're selecting assumptions, which was on our slide of areas where we deploy actuarial judgment, right? We may need to be flexible in how we do things. And I think for me, personally, it's taken some time from the exam process where things could be somewhat rigid to develop the flexibility of actuarial judgment to implement certain solutions in an adaptive way. And Scott, for me, that's one thing that I would say is a bit hard to teach, but practical experience goes a long way to developing that skill set of flexibility.
I'll say critical thinking skills. That's one of my favorite, because I want my actuaries to be intellectually curious. So if you're going to make a massive change to a reserve or a pricing pick, you have to have a narrative of why you're doing it, right? You can't just be, I picked different factors than the previous guy, and whoosh. I mean, think of what that does to our profession. They're like, wow, these actuaries can make anything happen. What if I want the number to be this or that? You start getting, book cooking and weird accounting. No, we have to have a very, very good thought process, chain of thought of why did I pick this? What do I believe? What do I believe changed? And how do I explain this in a way that people who aren't actuaries can understand what's happening?
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for that question. One more slide, I believe, and then we'll save room for a couple audience questions if you have any. is about maintaining good actuarial judgment under pressure. Oftentimes we may be working for organizations or insurance companies or institutions that have certain goals for their financial balance sheets, right? They may have certain considerations that are not perfectly aligned with impartial actuarial analysis, right? This could be company dependent, could be person dependent. But we want to talk about how we can maintain good actuarial judgment even under pressure, right? So on the prior slide where we talked about indicators, we don't want to see the opposite of those things happening when we're under pressure. So we don't want to see ourselves foregoing technical and peer reviews when we're under pressure. We don't want to find ourselves being completely rigid or completely accepting of answers when we're under pressure. Going back to the professional standards and codes of conduct, staying grounded in those standards is a good way to maintain good actuarial judgment. For me, being a U.S. actuary, I reference the actuarial standards of principles from the Actuarial Standards Board quite often, especially when I'm doing a task that's not in my everyday responsibilities. I have standards and professional guidance that I could look to make sure that I'm doing things in an appropriate way. Transparent and clear communication. We talked about that being one of the main duties of care of the actuary. Staying objective and using critical thinking skills. We've heard these before in the presentation. Ethical decision making, that was on the last slide as well. Seeking advice and keeping detailed documentation, right? That's a great way to ensure that your decision making has been documented and achieved and completed in a way that hasn't been the result of pressure to conform to a specified answer. Frank, anything you'd like to add before we take a question?
No, it's good. Let's take a question. We've got 1 minute.
Any questions? There may be a microphone or two out there. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Oh, question over here. Is there a microphone in the audience? Oh. Frank's braver than me. I was going to take the stairs.
So Frank, it's more of a comment than a question. A few months ago, I was writing something for the local newspaper in Marathi. I was struggling to find what's the right word for actuarial. And after much thought and discussions with a few colleagues, we came to a conclusion that the word in Marathi as well as in Gujarati would be atkal ganit, which means anticipatory mathematics. So all the time what we're doing is we're trying to anticipate the outcomes, then get that flexibility and get that critical thinking. So just a thought that I wanted to share, that sometimes you are able to better express in your local language of what the underlying emotion is. It's all about anticipation. And then thinking, when you're looking at anticipation, we're never doing point estimates. We are doing a range, and then within that range, we're trying to pick based on what we think is appropriate at that point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Thank you
good to
for
get
that.
the context, isn't it, that way? Okay, so I think we're pushed for time, so maybe we'll wrap up there if that's okay. And if anybody's got any other questions, anything else that comes to mind, maybe one more? Yeah? Maybe we should get Frank to go to the back of the room or something, you know.
It's not a question, it's just observation. You mentioned about judgment. What is the meaning of judgment you started in the start? Judgment. See, judgment means it's final unless you have a right to appeal. Because my father was a judge and he told me to do this and I had to do this. So judgment has a different meaning. In actual context, yes, it is opinion, but literary meaning of judgment is it's final unless you have a right to appeal.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Well, thank you everybody for for staying with us and to go through the session today. And thanks to Frank, thanks to Brian for going through all the information and going through the presentation. I think big round of applause for the guys. Thank you very much.